TMJ4.
This is breaking news now on your side.
And that breaking news, the verdict is in for the Derek Williams inquest.
As we've been reporting for the noon hour, the verdict has been reached and has now been read. Here it is. 2 questions answered. The jury had the opportunity to answer 4 questions, but the last 2 became moot points. So as to the first question, is there probable cause to believe that a sickle cell crisis caused the death of Derek Williams? And the jury answered yes to that question.
And we could just hear Judge Kevin Martins in the courtroom talking with the jury about that, taking the next steps moving forward.
The next question that the jury was asked to deliberate is essentially the key to this whole thing, is whether or not the officers who were involved in the care and arrest in this case could have rendered aid, and whether they failed to do so. So was there probable cause to show that the officers failed to render aid? And in this case, the jury found that in the case of all 3 officers who were in question here, all 3 of them failed to render aid. There is probable cause to say that. Therefore, the answer on all 3 counts, or all 3 issues for each of those law enforcement officers, was yes.
And that was a jury of 6 members who made those recommendations. We are going to be joined right now live by Mike Jacobs in the newsroom. Mike?
Well, certainly a dramatic decision by the jurors at this inquest jury today, particularly as it relates to question number 2, because that really was the key to all of this, and that is whether or not the police officers, the 3 of them involved in the case, failed to render aid. Now, the burden really comes to Judge John Franke, who has served as a special prosecutor in this case. He must decide whether or not to take what would be the next and perhaps ultimate step, and that is actually filing charges against these 3 officers. Each of them had slightly different roles in the case. Officer Richard Ticcioni was the man who was involved in the actual arrest itself. He placed his knee on the shoulder of Derek Williams while he was down on the ground. Williams was subsequently taken into the back of a squad car, and that was where we saw that video that has become all too familiar over the last several months of him struggling to breathe, saying he did not breathe. Officer Klein and Officer Blakewell at one point or another were in the front of that squad car, and they were arguably in a position to hear and or see what was going on in the back of the squad car. And so what the jury was asked to decide was whether or not they failed to render aid in this case. And so at the end of the day, the jury deciding these 2 factors: 1, that Derek Williams died of a sickle cell crisis, and 2, that these officers failed to render aid to try and act promptly to save his life. That could result, I emphasize the word could result, in a misdemeanor criminal charge being filed against those officers, guys.
The answer to question 1 is important, isn't it, Mike? Because you look at what the jury was asked, and basically they say these officers didn't necessarily cause his death. That's correct. The answer to question 1. Correct. But that they should have helped him. That
is basically what they have said. And by the way, there has been an ongoing dispute among the medical experts during the course of this inquest itself as to whether or not sickle cell crisis caused his death. Derek Williams had the trait for sickle cell as opposed to sickle cell itself. Seems like a fine distinction there, but the medical experts have disagreed over whether or not he actually had sickle cell crisis and whether or not that caused his death. And to your point, yes, clearly the jury has ruled that it was a sickle cell crisis that was the actual cause of death. Part 2 then was whether or not the officers intentionally failed to act to render aid in a timely manner, and ultimately, as we know, he died. Even though after he passed out, basically, they did give CPR. The question is whether or not they did so in a timely manner.
And Mike, you had mentioned that now it's up to Special Prosecutor John Franke to move forward, but how soon, how quickly will a decision be made, and will there definitely be a decision made?
Well, there definitely will be a decision made. There's no doubt about that. The question is the timing of it. Judge Franke has been very deliberative throughout this process, and frankly, throughout his entire career. So while you would not expect him to make a snap decision on all of this, he's heard all the evidence. He has asked all the questions in his own mind, even prior to the jury's finding today. He has probably formed his own opinion about this, but now he'll take a look at some of the evidence again and make a final decision. My guess is it will happen in a fairly timely manner. I'd hesitate to predict that it'll happen today, but you never know.
And Mike, we get to the point where Frankie is the special prosecutor in this case because, as I think you indicated earlier, District Attorney in this case, John Chisholm, recused himself, essentially creating the need for the special prosecutor.
Yeah, basically he did, because as you recall, Chisholm and the police chief and a variety of others took a look at this video shortly after the incident occurred, and they all took a pass on it. In terms of criminal charges, you know, they weren't too happy about what they saw, I'm sure, but decided, despite the impact of that powerful video, there wasn't anything criminal in their mind. So once the Journal-Sentinel was able to get this video out, released, after months of struggling with the police department to get it released, they got the medical examiner, the assistant medical examiner, who initially made the decision to take another look at it, something he had, not another look at it, the first look at it. He hadn't seen it the first time around for whatever reason, to review the police reports and then change his findings to a homicide charge as opposed to natural causes. So in any case, we've got Frankie coming up with a decision before very long, and that isn't necessarily the end of it. As I mentioned earlier, FBI agents have been in court every day of this proceeding. They could still take a look at civil rights violations against Derek Williams. That is 2 or 3 steps down the road, guys.
All right, Mike Jacobs joining us live from the newsroom. And if you are just joining us, we are bringing you breaking news with a decision. The verdict has come down in the Derek Williams inquest, and the jury did rule that they do believe Derek Williams died of sickle cell crisis. However, they do believe that those 3 officers involved failed to render aid.
As Mike indicated, the ultimate decision now as to how to proceed rests in the hands of the special prosecutor in this case. Today's TMJ4 has our reporting crews and photographers down at the county courthouse, and they are gathering, as we speak, reaction to this story. We'll bring that to you online and on air on today's TMJ4 and today's TMJ4.com throughout the afternoon.
Now we'll send you back to your programming.